Evening, everybody. Sorry, we're just waiting for more people to log on, but it seems to be kind of evening out now. So I think we'll get started and then people can join us as we go on. So good evening, and thanks very much for joining us for another Discover Wildlife evening. This evening, we're going to be talking about Canada. So for those of you who don't know me, my name's Emma Healy and I work as a travel consultant and a photographic tour leader for Wildlife Worldwide and the Traveling Naturalist. And tonight we're joined by Lee Morgan, who is going to be taking us through the Canadian Rockies. I've been lucky enough to visit, and I've decided to be on brand tonight with my favorite spot in the Rockies behind me. And it's the most incredible location for wildlife, for scenery, but it's not an easy place to go on your own and find the wildlife. You know, it's not somewhere you can kind of drive and things walk up to you. They can, but it's quite tricky, and you know, it's not without its challenges. So Lee's going to be highlighting some of these challenges, as well as where to go, and his favorite bits, and where our trip goes to find the incredible flora and fauna that are available. So we're probably going to be talking for about 40 minutes or so. As usual, there'll be the opportunity to have some questions. We've got the chat and the forum, so please use the Q&A or the chat, whatever's easiest. Some of them we can answer as we go along, and then at the end, once Lee's finished, we'll take some questions and put them to Lee at the end. So Lee and his partner Lindsay lead our Canadian Rockies trips every June time, and at the end we'll have a poll which will give you the ability to request an itinerary, or you can email us at sales@Wildlife Worldwide as well, and we can help you out with any questions that you might have then. But Lindsay and Lee are both very talented naturalists and photographers. I'm really excited to see the talk and hear all about Canada and relive some memories. And unfortunately, when I went, I didn't have a camera that was good enough to do anything, so I'm sure I'm going to be very jealous. So Lee, it's about time I stop talking and I'll hand over to you.
Hello. Excellent. Is that all working? Hopefully everyone can see and hear me okay, but this is a new experience for me doing my talks by Zoom, but hopefully it all works out. Well, yeah, as Emma said, we've been running tours in the Rockies for quite some time now, and it's taken us a little while to get things really dialed in for what's best for naturalists visiting from the UK. Now, this particular tour runs in June, which we felt is perfect for general naturalists. It's an all-round tour, natural history tour, and suits all interests. It provides plenty of photographic opportunities for people of all abilities too. But it's really not, we don't really target it as a major photographic tour, but a general all-round wildlife and natural history experience. You'll notice in this picture here, we have a moose here, and you can see it lacks any large antlers, and that's because in June, most of the animals we see don't actually have any antlers. The rut is a very exciting time in the Rockies, where you have things like these elk locking antlers and bellowing, but that's not really something that happens in this early spring period. Most of the ungulates we see, it's far more sedate. Most of them, if they have antlers, they're in velvet, and they're less fired up on testosterone, so they're much easier to watch, and it's much more relaxing experience for all involved. You can see here we've got elk and white-tailed deer and moose are all relatively common on most of our tours. Now, it doesn't mean that because they haven't got large antlers, they're nonetheless impressive. If ever you've been sitting quietly, as I was here, photographing snipe in a flooded meadow, a close encounter with a moose like this can be quite imposing. Fortunately, this was all a very relaxed experience, not something we encourage on our tours. We generally like to view things from a greater distance, and but sitting quietly often means that the animals get quite used to you, and they will sometimes come closer. Now, obviously in the springtime, one of the great advantages is you have lots of other things that would otherwise be sleeping or hibernating at other times of the year, or be more active below ground. So lots of small mammals present in the Rockies, and they're always great fun to watch. You can see Lindsay coming eye to eye with a curious Columbia ground squirrel up in the top corner there, and also the chipmunk and the similar looking golden mantle ground squirrel are all fairly common on these general natural history tours. This sort of early summer, spring, early summer is a great transition time as well. And lots and lots of wildflowers are starting to come into bloom in various meadows. There's the subalpine zone and a montane zone. And usually as we travel around, we find really good flushes of wildflowers that are either just starting as the snow has just cleared, or they've been in full bloom for a while, like some of these montane meadows, producing lots of lush, luxuriant and colorful wildflowers. And there really is a lot to see, many of which are very specialist species that you can only find in certain areas, and others are much more widespread. But for any budding botanist, there's plenty to see in the Rockies in June. There's also lots of insects starting to come on the wing. Actually, we often get asked about biting insects and midges, but the Rockies generally isn't that bad at this time of year. In fact, I've had worse experiences in an English woodland in spring than I've ever had in the Rockies. But butterflies are often common, just starting, and things like this lovely variable checker spot can be seen flying in meadows, usually at some point on the tour. There's also baby animals around at this time of year, and everyone loves seeing calves and young animals. Unfortunately, bison are no longer really part of the Canadian Rockies scene, as they were wiped out by hunting in the sort of late 1800s. But there have been recent attempts to reintroduce bison to parts of the Rockies. You can still see them in some of the southern reaches of the Rockies, but a recent reintroduction program in Banff National Park, with a vast area, has been proven to be successful. So we do have high hopes that in the future there will be an opportunity to see bison in parts of the national parks that we visit. There's usually plenty of young lambs of the bighorn sheep, and these are often very prevalent down by the roadsides, where they'll come, and it's much safer from predators at this time of year if the females congregate around the roads and where people are. So it's not uncommon to see young lambs sitting by their mothers as their mothers nibble at grit and salt off the edge of the road. And of course, it's an excellent time for young bears to be out and about. Young black bears like this one, you have to remember to look up in the trees as well as down on the ground for these things, because they're very agile climbers. But everyone loves seeing these. And of course, at this time of year, it is the perfect opportunity to see young bears out and about with their mums. And we were very lucky on our last trip to actually see this, which was a grizzly bear, which has relatively newly emerged from her den with 3 very, very young cubs. So things are very changeable at this time, but there's always plenty of diversity to see. And now, just a bit of an outline of where we're talking about in the Rockies. Well, the Rockies is actually vast. And it can be a difficult, very daunting place to organize trips. And it extends from right down here across into the USA, and extends right the way up over 900 miles up, and actually starts to peter out in northern BC here, and finishes up in the Yukon there. It's about 100 miles across. And this is a vast area to explore. And most of our exploration actually covers this core area of the Rockies here in Alberta, and a small area down into BC as well. So we cover a fair amount of ground, but allowing ourselves plenty of time in each location to really get some quality wildlife viewing time. Now, the highest mountain in the Rockies, it's a very steep sided mountain in the front ranges, and it's Mount Robson. It's about 13,000 feet, just shy of 13,000 feet. And it doesn't really stand out as exceptionally that much taller than many of the other peaks in the range. There's vast areas of wilderness, and you can see the front ranges of the Rockies spreading out in front of you in this picture. Lindsay's looking out from a high promontory here. But you can see it does give you a sense of the vast areas of wilderness. Now, there's over 70,000 square miles of wilderness in the Rockies throughout the Rocky Mountain range. Now that's roughly about 3/4 of the size of the whole of the UK. So if you can imagine that as a large area to start your search from when you're looking for wildlife. Within that area, there's vast areas of different habitats. You've got vast areas of dense boreal forest, and you have glacial rivers, and you have these different mountain ranges. This is part of the main range, and it's typified by these stacked rocks, which look a bit like an impressive sort of Italian dessert. The main ranges are typified by these jagged, pointy mountain tops. They're very impressive. And again, you can see the vast tracts of boreal forest, the open patches of montane and subalpine meadow, and then also typified by these turquoise glacial rivers. It's a highly dynamic habitat with lots and lots of different ecosystems within it. Has some incredibly impressive waterfalls. And there's lots of those. This is Takako Falls, one of the highest falls, about just shy of 400 meters high. And this is a very impressive tall fall in Yoho National Park. And beautiful crystal clear turquoise lakes are very much part and parcel of the scene. And this picture here was taken at exactly the time that we visit the Rockies, and it gives a good example of why it's good to go, because there's still a fair amount of snow high up in the mountains, which means that wildlife is generally concentrated in the valley bottoms. Now, these are large, wide, U-shaped valleys, typical of a glacial landscape, and they can be seen, and it's possible to still see some of the glaciers present. This is the Athabasca Glacier and on the Icefields Parkway. And while all of these glaciers are still in retreat and have retreated a long way in recent years, it's still nice to call in and see this really spectacular landscape with its tundra-like alpine vegetation growing in the rocks around the moraines. Now, really, one of the great benefits of visiting the Rockies is it's very accessible, and it's been accessible for nearly over 100 years. The railway was really the first port of call that brought visitors to the Rockies who came from all around the world, and it was really instrumental in making the Canadian Rockies a world-class tourist destination, with people traveling to experience the mountain air and the nice walks and the beautiful scenery. There was also hot springs in these areas, which were thought to be of medical benefit or therapeutic benefit for lots of visitors that came from busy towns and cities. And it definitely still does attract a lot. And the Rocky Mountaineer still takes tens of thousands of people through the Rockies every year. But this sort of travel can be very frustrating to a naturalist, being stuck on a train looking at beautiful scenery and not being able to stop and take pictures or look for flowers and insects or look for other wildlife and birds. Can be an incredible frustration. Nonetheless, the tourist trap is still there. This is just a quick search on Google, and you can see these wonderful pictures of this idyllic wilderness experience that they're selling. Now, unfortunately, this is a picture of Lake Louise, and most people that visit actually experience something a bit more like this. Lake Louise is a very busy destination, and in fact, if you look on Google and you quickly search top places to visit in the Rockies, most of those places I would suggest you actually avoid, because they tend to be very busy tourist traps. Then nonetheless, they are very spectacular places, and we do try and call in and see them, but we usually time our visits for when many of the tourists are back in their hotels enjoying their dinner, and we can enjoy a bit more peace and tranquility when we visit these sites. These busy tourist places are good places to see wildlife. There's lots of wildlife that becomes quite accustomed to the hustle and bustle of busy tourist traffic. And if ever anyone's stopped in a car park anywhere in the mountains in Canada, you've probably seen one of these. It's a lovely grey jay, and they're a member of the corvid family, so they're related to crows and ravens. And they're intelligent birds, and they know how to get an easy meal out of anyone that's unpacking a lunchbox. Clark's nutcrackers, another member of the corvid family, are fairly common around these areas. And when you park in the car park at Lake Louise, for example, they will frequently come and land on the window and inspect as you open the car door to see if you've got anything tasty that they can pop inside and steal. Obviously, feeding animals in the parks is is actually illegal, so it's not something we ever encourage. But many of these animals make a good living mooching for scraps that are inadvertently dropped by all the passers-by and tourists. Now, most visitors, the promise of wildlife is something far greater than most visitors ever experience. But most visitors will have encountered this, the Columbia ground squirrel. These are absolutely gorgeous. And if you're a rodent lover like myself, just seeing these up close and personal is a joy unto itself. Seeing something like this might be something that a very lucky visitor to the Rockies might see. And there's a grizzly bear wandering along the railroad tracks. If you're trundling along on the Rocky Mountaineer, the grizzly bears actually feed along the railway sometimes because the grain trucks from the prairies will often drop grain. It's actually a problem for much of the wildlife. So seeing wildlife near the railway isn't ideal if you're a nature lover. And we tend to shy away. Nonetheless, any visitor that's visiting the Rockies with the promise of wildlife and they're stuck on a train, this would still be a great highlight. There's also hundreds of miles of incredibly beautiful road that run through the Rockies. This is a more recent addition to the Rockies landscape, really. The railroad was here first, but these wide open roads traveling through the mountains do provide an increased level of relatively easy access. But again, it's easy to make the mistake of spending all your time in a car driving around looking for wildlife and actually ending up missing most of it. It's very important to have strategically look at where you're locating yourself in the Rockies, look for the best places, stop in the best places, and getting out on foot for any naturalist and exploring these habitats is actually really important. Most of our, this shows you some of the parks that we explore. We've got the Banff National Park here, and its proximity to Calgary, where most of our tours start. It's a couple of hours drive through into Canmore. Canmore is a lovely mountain town surrounded by beautiful mountains and wonderful trails, and equally pretty scenery and great wildlife to that can be found in the national parks. So we do spend a bit of time exploring these areas. Once in the national parks, we visit Banff National Park here, and we do travel up to Jasper, and we also spend time exploring other national parks as well, Yoho, and sometimes dipping down into the Kootenays as well. These main highways, though, are not great places to search for wildlife. In fact, Highway 1 is the main motorway that travels across Canada, and it's fenced off for the safety of wildlife. And there are a number of very expensive and very good quality wildlife crossings over this. So spotting wildlife in this area is never a good thing. We start in Calgary with our trips, and it's a good opportunity for us to experience some of the prairie type wildlife that's present around there. And even around the airport, you can spot things like this Richardson's ground squirrel burrowing into the roadside verges, excuse me. But it's the transition from the prairie landscape as you head towards the Rockies that's most impressive. In the prairies, it's very flat, slightly undulating, and ahead of you as you approach the Rockies, you can see this towering white mountain range spread out ahead of you. And usually at this time, it's quite warm and in the prairies, but you can see usually there's still snow on the high mountains ahead of you. As you start to skirt the edge of the montane and boreal forests, as you drive along the edge of the parks, it's a good place to look for owls. And things like this great grey owl, a very impressive species that you can sometimes see as you travel along the margins of these dense boreal forests, particularly when they transition with farmland and open prairie. So the roadside verges are a great luxuriant growth of all these wonderful montane and submontane flowers, and rich, luxurious growth of grasses is very alluring to bears that are fresh out of hibernation, that are looking for sustenance, and they will actually graze the roadside margins. There's a very handsome black bear here that many people that drive through the Rockies will encounter these as they drive around. They come in a great range of colors. The black bears in the Rockies, far more diverse than we get here on the coast in BC. It's very common to encounter brown or blonde and sometimes even white black bears in the Rockies. It's much rarer to find white ones, but this cinnamon form and even a sort of gingery form are fairly commonly encountered and often result in people thinking they've seen a grizzly bear when actually they've seen one of these brown black bears. Nonetheless, they're always very handsome and nice to see them when you do spot them. Now, unfortunately, if you do spot a bear and you stop, if it's a busy road, you will quickly attract the attention of all sorts of other visitors, some of whom are better at watching wildlife than others. You will undoubtedly see some of the worst behavior around wildlife that you can see anywhere in the world, around some of these bear jams, as they're called, where the roads become full of people stopping to look at wildlife. So it's usually best to confine most of your wildlife watching to quieter back roads where you'll attract less attention when you do find wildlife. It's also good to have a guide with you, someone who knows what they're doing, knows where to look. And you can see here we've got some of our photographers with us paying attention to the wildlife in front of them while I'm standing behind them with bear spray, watching for things that might pop out of the bushes. We have to remember there are mountain lions, there are wolves, there are grizzly bears, there are black bears, there are all sorts of things in these vast open tracts of wilderness. And keeping an eye out for that and watching out for the people in our charge, we take that safety very seriously. Just as an example, if anyone can spot the wildlife in this picture, this is a very early morning picture and was taken just in front of one of the remote wilderness lodges we stay in. If you haven't seen it, there's actually a grizzly bear here, and our lodge we stay in is just there behind this tree. So it's easy to run into wildlife accidentally in the Rockies. And this bear was found just less than 100 yards in front of our in front of one of the lodges we stay in, and that was actually on the last Wildlife Worldwide trip we gave. Once you're in the mountains, the weather is typically mountain weather, and you have to be prepared for everything. The heavens can open at any minute. You can get snow flurries and blizzards happening. Even on a clear bluebird sky, when you leave the hotel in the morning, the weather can change very quickly, or you can find yourself traveling to altitude and you'll end up in the snow. So you have to be prepared for everything. And this is a particularly violent hailstorm in the middle of summer in the southern Rockies, and that's more prevalent in those areas. And here, this is in late May. You can see that they don't build their signs very, very low in the Rockies. This is an 8-foot high signpost, but you can still see that there's about 5 to 7 feet of snow still on the ground in some areas when we visit. And these two pictures were taken a day apart. One day, this bald eagle was photographed in a blizzard on the right-hand side, and the very next day we returned to see the eagle sitting in a tree, and it was comparatively mild and the snow had disappeared. Whatever you do in the Rockies, it's nice to get out on foot and explore, and we're often asked how easy or difficult it is. And people often have this vision of this intrepid hikes that you can end up on if you book on hiking-based tours. We tend to prefer sauntering, and easy trails are very much better for us to saunter along and look for birds and the wildlife that we're expecting to see as we visit these areas. Bird watching and spotting smaller birds is often impossible from a moving vehicle, so getting out on foot is very important if you want to do some bird watching. And there's lots of lovely boreal birds to see, things like this pine grosbeak, or one of my favorite chickadees, the boreal chickadee. And then other pretty mountain birds, mountain bluebirds or Townsend solitaires, which have a particularly beautiful song. It's nice to get out on foot and experience some of this. And also smaller owls as well can be found on the edge of the boreal forests. This hunting northern pygmy owl was just sitting there, and it was actually hunting grey jays. Getting out on foot is also important if you want to find lots of the wonderful plants in these boreal forests. They're a great place to explore, and we often pride ourselves on finding as many orchid species as we can. And here we have a beautiful candy striped coral spotted orchid here. And then the North American endemic, the Orchis rotundifolia, this round-leaved orchid here is another pretty orchid we see in great abundance on our tours. There's a handsome selection of sort of lady slipper orchids and calypso orchids as well. So for any wildflower lovers, there's plenty to see and find in these boreal forests. Now, with all this abundance of wildlife that you can find at this time of year, there's plenty of predators around as well. And one of the common predators we see in these dense boreal forests are things like pine martens, which will happily mooch around and are fairly inquisitive of people, particularly given that people often leave scraps of food around. So they'll often watch us from a safe distance from behind a bench or along a trail. And there are other predators too. Coyotes, wolves, lynx, it's possible to see all of them in the Rockies, although some of those species, particularly the larger cats, can be incredibly rare sightings. This is a coyote here sleeping under a tree. Other habitats that are worth exploring are lakes. Some of the crystal clear lakes, as they clear from ice, reveal lots of tiny trout. And these trout are a great food source for lots of birds, which make their way into the Rockies to breed just at this time of the year. And seeing loons, and more importantly, hearing loons, great northern divers to the UK watchers, calling across these remote mountain lakes, just that alone is worth visiting the Rockies for, this beautiful call. Ospreys are fairly common as well, and they make a good living in these very clear, shallow lakes that are all over these mountains, and will often bring on their chicks considerably earlier than they can in other areas. Boggy mountain meadows can be really good places where you have meandering rivers, wonderful places to explore as well. Not many people explore these habitats. You have to be a really enthusiastic naturalist to explore some of these habitats, but they're often alive with the sounds of things like boreal toads at this time of year. It's a very handsome, colorful toad that will call from deep in the cover. And then the roding of woodcock, of Wilson's snipe over these areas can be a wonderful sound as well, whirring as they fly around overhead. These are also good places to look for things like beaver as well. Now, beaver are surprisingly common in the Rockies, but they can be tricky to see. They're fairly crepuscular in their activities. But visiting in June, they tend to be at one of their peak levels of activity, still hungry after their winter dormant period, and they're busy stockpiling fat, usually from areas where there's plenty of willow trees to chew on. They're also one of the hotspots for moose, which come down into these boggy areas and wade out into the mud to lick minerals and get a few important nutrients that they get from these muddy soils in these areas. Knowing where to look for moose can be a real trick to the success of finding them. And of course, there's baby animals around as well, and young moose, seeing young moose nibbling at shoots on the edge of a dense boreal forest can be a real treat. Even traveling to the higher altitudes can be fairly straightforward in the Rockies. People are often worried about it. It's nice to get into some of this high alpine tundra areas, tundra type vegetation, and the trails are often very good. This is a wonderful boardwalk trail that helps protect some of these fragile tundra type landscape in the high alpine part of where we stay. And here you can explore and look for more specialist alpine wildflowers. And maybe while you're sitting there, you may also have a pika walk out and squeak at you from around the rocks. These are wonderful. These boulder bunnies, as they're sometimes referred, are actually a lagomorph. They're related to rabbits, but they're about the size of a hamster. And having these things scurrying around the rocks, they're a wonderful joy to sit there patiently and watch them. And they'll often come out and have a close look at you. And marmots do very much the same thing. This is the hoary marmot, very much a mountain or alpine specialist. Can be very difficult to see unless you actually travel up into the high alpine zones. So we'll always make an effort to see some of these more specialist mammals. Specialist birds as well. Grey-crowned rosy finch, very much a high alpine species, but at this time of year, they often can be found by the roadsides as they're picking at seeds from things like dandelions. And traveling to higher elevation at this time of year also gives you a better chance of seeing some of the bigger, more impressive bighorn sheep, the males that tend to move up into the mountains almost as soon as the snow is cleared. So it's a good opportunity to see some of these animals that you will rarely see if you stick just to the roads. And of course, things like the real alpine specialists, which are things like the mountain goat, can often be seen from afar, but occasionally traveling higher up into the mountains can give you a much better chance of getting a good view of these alpine specialists. Anyway, they say it's always important to end on a sunset, and there are many, many beautiful sunsets to be seen and many beautiful views to be seen in the Rockies. And I hope that answers many of your questions. Thank you very much for joining us.
Fab. Well, thanks, Lee. Amazing. You've now made it more difficult for me to decide where to go, because I'd sort of trying to put off going back, but actually now I've just been looking at flights. Thanks. So thank you so much for that. Amazing photos. Really good insight into what you can see, which is great. I've definitely been in those, what did you call them? Bear jams where you just they're a very common feature. You feel so special because you found a bear by the road and suddenly there's 15 cars stopped behind you. Where did you come from? And everyone's like, what have you seen? What have you seen? What have you seen? I'm like, well, there's a bird there, but I was just stretching my legs.
Yeah, you get very good at a distraction technique in the Rockies sometimes, where you point a camera out at a window at a bare branch and with nothing around, and people eventually look at what you're not seeing and move on, and then you can wait patiently and wait for the bear to come out. So it's
we've had a few questions. We'll answer a few of those, and I'm going to launch a poll now in the meantime, just for anyone who's interested in finding out about our trip that we run, well, that Lee runs over there. So please do let us know if you'd like us to send you through a travel plan by answering that poll. And then, yeah, let's answer some questions. So first one, and this is quite interesting because Lee and I were talking beforehand about some people who think they can come from Vancouver and do a day trip to the Rockies, because it is quite a way, but there are ways of doing different parts of Canada obviously together, especially if you're doing a tailor-made, self-drive or tagging on an extension to one of our group trips. So we've had a question: is it possible to combine this with a coastal extension to see sea otters?
It would be possible, yes.
Tell us more.
Usually there are very good flights from Calgary to Vancouver, or from Calgary to Victoria, which gets you straight onto Vancouver Island, and then from there you can travel up Vancouver Island and do sea otter tours from there, and see a whole host of other coastal wildlife as well. Then it's certainly possible to do that. And actually, springtime on Vancouver Island is probably one of the most underrated times to visit the coast as well. So it's wonderful. I would suggest that with this, I would suggest visiting maybe the coast before, and then traveling up to the Rockies and starting a Rockies tour in Calgary. But it's very much doable, but it probably would be best to fly. It's a long drive from Vancouver to the Rockies, and it's quite a tiring drive, and there's not a great deal to see on the way. It's a bit of a slog. So a nice easy 2-hour flight or 1.5-hour flight from Victoria to Calgary is very much easier. So yeah. It's certainly doable.
So probably best to fly into Vancouver, do that bit and do Victoria, and then fly over, and then you can fly home from Calgary. So it saves you going back to Vancouver. So it is quite easily done. So yeah, we can definitely do that.
Yes. And watch this space. We'll be recommending exactly that for you.
Yeah. So one question, what is bear spray and what does it do?
All right, bear spray is basically, it's a pepper spray. It's stronger than the pepper spray that the police would use on, on riot control police might use. It's pretty much pure capsaicin in what is basically like a small fire extinguisher. And it has a range of about 5 meters. It's incredibly important to carry bear spray in these areas because you can inadvertently encounter bears at any time, and knowing how to use it and making sure you've got a bear deterrent, it's really there as a last resort. Touch wood, I've never had to use it. And we try and do everything within our power to avoid having to use it. But if ever there is a situation where for some unknown reason a bear becomes surprised or agitated and does charge people, bear spray has consistently proven to be a very, very successful way of deterring and stopping an attack.
Perfect. Okay. And a couple of questions about wolves. So I know you said predators are slightly harder to see, obviously, but there's a couple of questions of what's the likelihood of seeing mountain lion and wolves. So I guess, how many times have you seen them, or how frequently do you see them?
Mountain lion is, is one of those species I sometimes have to try and remember that it does actually exist. And it's not just a made-up animal that people talk about. They're incredibly rare to see. I think I've had about 11 mountain lion viewings in my entire life. And I've spent a lot of time driving roads. So mountain lion is a very, very rare encounter. It does happen, and they certainly do get seen in some of the locations that we stay at. That's why we stay at some of those locations. But seeing them would be an incredibly rare and exciting event for everyone. Wolf encounters are a little more common in the Rockies, although the wolf populations have been subject to change and movements, and that in Banff, for example, there's been some of the wolf packs that used to be regularly seen have been, disrupted and disturbed and have moved around a bit. So finding consistent wolves in the Rockies is still tricky, but it's far more common than seeing any of the cats, for example.
Yeah, it's funny. I don't know about you. I find you always see the things you don't want to see when you don't. You always see the things you want to see when you don't want to see them. So because I know with lynx and with mountain lions and grizzly bears, you tend to see them when you're hiking rather than you're driving along. I had that with I saw about, I don't even know, on one trip about 10 black bears by the road, from the car. Brilliant. One hike we went on, there was a massive grizzly bear just right in front of us in the path, and you think, all the times I could have seen a grizzly in the car. And that's, I think, how it tends to happen when things are a bit quieter. They tend to be in the sort of quieter places. And I know you were talking about walking and going up the trails, and one of the questions we often get asked is how fit do I need to be, or how much walking is there? And I know with this one you will be driving to the places, but it'd be good to just talk a little bit perhaps about what, how far you do actually walk and inclines and things, if possible.
Yeah, generally, the only trails we take most of our groups on, because we have varying abilities, and we always work to the slowest member of the group, a bit like a wolf pack. You don't have people marching off. It's better for all of us, and it's safer when we're moving to keep the group together. We are much safer and as a combined unit. So we generally keep the group together. So working to the slowest or member of the group is definitely the best way to travel. And we've never found that it inhibits our ability to find wildlife ever. In fact, it usually aids it. The slower you move through, the more likely you are to encounter things. We never really take very long, extended hikes unless the group is one that would like to do that. Most of the inclines are pretty level, maybe, and they're all of the trails we go on are rated as easy in any of the guidebooks. So, it's not uncommon to see children and elderly people easily doing many of the hikes. And really, it's just about what we're seeing at the time. We tend to follow our nose. While there may be birds, we'll be moving slowly. I've been told that as a bird watcher and naturalist, my hiking out here is considered, the pace is considered glacial, I've been told. So I often don't move fast enough for many people who want to enjoy a good leg stretch and a hike, but that's because I'm looking at things and enjoying things. So that it's a very low impact. You do not have to be, an experienced mountain hiker to enjoy, these wildlife tours. They're really not. They're not designed to be arduous hiking tours. And the wonderful thing about the Rockies is if you do want to get to the high alpine, the areas we go to do take us through different zones and different regions. So the areas we stay in will take us to those different areas. So we pretty much can drive to them. And you also have cable cars and things like that you can use as well. So
nice. Talking of driving around, what transport do you use to get around on the trip?
Generally we use a minibus of some sort, and if we can get them, they can be difficult to get, but we do try to get like a 4-wheel drive minibus, which will help us when we go on some of the more remote back roads. Not that we ever really have to travel in 4-wheel drive mode. We're not doing off-road driving or anything like that, but it's just nicer to have the ability to, if we encounter snow, which we have on some of our trips, it's nice to have the confidence of a good vehicle that can get us to where we want to go.
Okay. And talking of snow, I know you did touch on the weather, but a couple of questions about weather in June and what it's likely to be like. It's kind of springtime, still a bit chilly, but what clothes to wear and what weather, best case, worst case?
Yeah, anything from you need to be prepared for snow and cold weather, but you also need to be prepared for quite hot weather as well. So we've had temperatures of 30 degrees in the valley bottoms and some days, and then you travel up into the mountains and it's icy, it's cold and snowing. So we usually give people a good rundown at the beginning of the day what our plan is, so that they go out prepared for the day, and layering is usually the best thing for the mountains. But yeah, typical spring weather, expect it to be cool, down jackets, a down vest is usually a good idea to have in your backpack, and then a waterproof shell there. But otherwise it's normal spring mountain weather, but expect anything at any time and be ready for it.
It's the perfect thing about mountains.
Yes.
And a couple of things really just about where we stay, so the hotels or the lodges, and I'm trying to phrase this properly, sort of experience a bit of the culture, the local beers, food, all of that kind of thing, just how much of that kind of experience you get as part of this as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, we like to do this trip in comfort. We do find that location is really important to us when we find hotels. We like hotels or lodges to be in the best wildlife locations, places where if people don't want to go out on a day's exploring, can stay at the hotel and still have a good chance of enjoying good scenery and seeing great wildlife, is really important to us when we find locations. So they're all comfortable hotels. We tend to dine out in local restaurants, so people get a chance to try some of the local scene. There's a lot of local breweries and all sorts of things in some of the towns now. In Banff and in Canmore, there's quite a food scene, so we like people to get as much of an experience of that as possible. So dining in restaurants is for evening meals is very important. We usually go out, we usually start the day with a very good breakfast as well, which again we'll find in town or very close to where we're staying in the hotel, and people can load up, and then we'll tend to take a packed lunch into the field with us during the day, so that can be enjoyed kind of as we're moving. Wherever we are, people can stop and have a packed lunch with them. So that tends to be how it all works.
Perfect. Okay, I think that's probably answered all the questions. I just need to pass on Chris's apologies. Some of you will have seen him pop up halfway through that. He's currently battling COVID, so please bear with him. No. He's his faculties are not necessarily all here, so bless him. We're all sending him good cold thoughts because he's quite hot apparently in the minute.
Oh dear.
So apologies for that halfway through, but yeah, massive thank you, Lee. I've absolutely loved it. By everybody's comments as well, they have just as much as me. It's always good to meet a fellow rodent lover as well. So really enjoyed seeing all your rodent pics. So yeah, thank you so much everybody for joining us again, especially on a Thursday. We know there's other places you could be, so thank you for being here. Yeah, I've sent out the poll, so hopefully those of you who would like to see a travel plan for the trip have filled that in, but do email us on sales@wildlifeworldwide.com if there's anything else, if you have any other questions. So yeah, we'll leave it there. There's a couple of talks next week, on the next couple of weeks. On the 1st of Feb, we've got Discover Macro Marine Photography. And then on the 10th of February, we've got Discover the Pantanal. So yeah, please do join us for those. Look on our website under events for all of the future talks, and please do sign up. We do record all of these, so if you want us to send any out afterwards, if you can't make any, then do let us know and we'll just send you the link. And you do have the special offer on there, so if you do want to book this trip, you do get £100 off if you mention that code. So please do get in touch, and hopefully Lee will be seeing some of you in a few months. We've added on the 2023 dates today to the website as well, so there's spaces on 22 and 23. So yeah, please do check it out. Perfect. Thanks so much, Lee, and thanks everybody.
Thank you.
See you soon. Bye.
Bye.